Hello, everyone, and welcome to Marker Plays Virtua Tennis. Here I'm going to run a tennis style podcast where I just talk about tennis. And so let's begin with some tennis news. One of my favorite players, Janko Tipsarevic, is taking the court after a few years. He's struggled with injuries. Thankfully, that's now over. Hopefully, we'll see him in singles actions, but currently he's playing in Miami with Novak Djokovic, his fellow countryman, in doubles. And then, in other tennis news, Del Potro, the person who I'm playing as on Virtua Tennis right now, came back today, but spoiler alert, he lost, sadly. And the funny thing is, during one of his last games that he was playing, he kind of strung his ankle. It didn't look good. He whiffed the ball as he was trying to turn and go to his forehand. It was sad to see him in pain, but he's been struggling with injuries all of his career, and it's just disappointing to see him come back and struggle again. It seems that Virtua Tennis is frozen. I'll just reset that really quick. My whole computer's frozen. It's good to know. Can you even still hear me? Is the video running? Hello? Looks like I just have to reset that really quick. And then we will be right back in to see tomorrow's matchups. So our first matchup of tomorrow, starting from the late game, we have Smichek versus Tsonga. When I was looking at this matchup, I thought probably Tsonga had it easy. He's the topper seed or higher seed. But Smichek is at home, and I didn't notice this, but Tsonga hasn't played at all this year. So I think probably the smartest thing to look at that game from, Tsonga's that big server and Smichek. Also, he has weapons. You could say his forehand is a weapon, you could say his serve is a weapon, but overall he doesn't really have anything spectacular about his game. So I think he draws a good matchup against Tsonga for someone who hasn't played the entirety of this year. And even before that, he only played, after Davis Cup, he only played in the IPTL, which really, he didn't really try in, as if you saw it, because he won versus Djokovic somehow, but then lost versus Monfils, which is weird for you to do. So, overall, I think Smichek has a chance, so I think he'll probably end up taking a set. And it'll be close, probably within 2 or 3 games. Our next game is probably my favorite matchup of tomorrow. Fabio Fognini versus Jack Sock. Fognini has been struggling all year. He's been struggling for a good while now, and Jack Sock just went the furthest he's ever been into a Masters 1000 last week. I think Sock can ride this momentum swing into being able to beat Fognini, especially since Sock is a clear underdog in this affair. It's definitely worth giving him a second look. I know he didn't do well versus Federer, but I believe that he didn't do well because of the fact that Federer is so dominant. When you see Fognini play, usually people step over him, and then it becomes their game because Fognini's too frustrated with himself to take charge. Now, if he isn't frustrated off the bat, Fognini could be a dangerous fellow, but Sock usually comes out there, gets quick starts, and is able to push his opponent to the bridge. As you saw versus Federer, Federer tried him out, figured out what he was all about, and sadly was able to beat him. But I don't think Fognini is that good of a player that he's able to do that, so my money's on Sock. Our next matchup is Ernest Gulbis versus Juan Monaco. Gulbis has had a rough year this year, only winning a couple of matches, if that. And then Juan Monaco, equally as bad, at least on the hard courts. So this is a tough matchup, and I think I'm probably going to stay away, as far away from this game as I possibly can. This game definitely, though I will say one thing about it, I think Gulbis is really power hungry for his win or past a second round of any tournament this year. So I think he'll definitely try. So I think this game probably will end up going over. Other than that, I have no idea how this game will go. I think it'll probably be pushed in a third set, if not only a tiebreak, so I think over games. Next, we have Fernando Verdasco versus Duckworth. This is an interesting matchup because it's that classic matchup of Duckworth, who is a classic rhythm server, you know, all about the serving, and then Verdasco, who is also about the serving, but also, sorry, he's not all about the serving, I got him confused with Lopez, but Verdasco is all about the returning. Definitely a weird matchup for round 2, but considering Duckworth is no more than just a qualifier, Verdasco probably has the upper hand as the returner, and probably will win it in straight sets. I don't see this game going long, and I think Verdasco will probably win it somewhere around like 6-4, 6-3. Yeah, it's really not that good of a matchup, but I think it's an interesting matchup nonetheless. And then next we have Monfils versus Krajinovic. Sorry, I'm not good with Serbian names, but I know him. I've seen him play the qualifiers, and I've seen him play in challengers. And you know, Monfils hasn't played a lot this year either. He skipped out last week in Indian Wells, so I'm not sure where he's going to be at. He hasn't played since Marseille, or more specifically the Davis Cup. So I don't know where, if he is out of rhythm versus Krajinovic, who definitely is some type of rhythm, you know, getting through the qualifiers of Indian Wells, getting through the qualifiers of Miami, and into the second round of Miami. It'll probably be a close game, maybe, if not only because Monfils hasn't played in a while. Otherwise, Monfils will probably just end up taking it. And then our next game is Nicolas Almagro versus Rafael Nadal. This is probably going to be a landslide. I know Almagro has won last time when they played each other, but I think that was mostly because Nadal was injured. And I believe that might have even been his last tournament before he took his injury leave. So I don't think that match is fair to say, especially how well Nadal has been playing in Indian Wells in all these tournaments, winning, I believe, 2 titles this year already, even though they were both on clay. He's still up to the challenge, and I don't think Almagro is that tough an opponent for him. Though Almagro might pose a threat, I do think Nadal will win it probably like 6-2, 6-3. Next we have, this is an interesting matchup, Wawrinka versus Berlocq. Berlocq has gotten far and only lost into his hometown versus Nadal. And then Wawrinka last week lost to Rosal? Or no, not Rosal, Hase. Hase, who then lost to Rosal. So, it's probably going to be a close game. I know Bolok didn't play last week and isn't as good as on hard, but Wawrinka has been pushed to 3 sets versus him in 2 of the 3 matches he's played, so I think it'll probably go the distance. I see Berlok easily getting the set and it being over. Probably going to be around 27, if not more games, because I think both players duking it out might end up even going to a tiebreak. So, probably over, if not Berlok for the spread. And then next we have Ramos versus Mannarino. This is definitely an interesting matchup because when I look at it, I immediately thought Ramos, but Ramos apparently is an underdog. He has played round 1, so he's used to the conditions here. Versus Mannarino, who got far last week in Indian Wells, but Ramos leads the head-to-head versus them. And if you see Djokovic versus Ramos, that game was intense. Djokovic tried to serve out the first set, and Ramos broke him, forcing him to at least a 7-5 set, which is impressive nonetheless for the world number 1, being able to break him while he's trying to serve out a set. And then Mannarino was able to make it all the way up to versus Murray, who he also lost into straight sets. So I think since Ramos showed more fight versus Djokovic, and Djokovic did end up winning the tournament, I think Ramos is definitely underrated for being an underdog bet. I think I was surprised it wasn't forecasted to be closer. And I think Ramos is definitely worth a second look. And then next week we have Andy Murray versus Donald Young. When I saw this matchup, I kind of felt sad for Donald Young because, you know, he's getting up there in age, and he's been doing well these past couple of weeks, especially at home. He was infamous, I was about to say famous, but I guess it's more infamy, of having, I think it was a 13-game losing streak last year or the year before. But ever since then, has definitely bounced back and exceeded everyone's expectations of him. And so I think he'll probably, I won't say he'll end up taking a set to Murray, even though he did take a set to Murray in the Davis Cup. I think it'll be close. I don't think him being decimal odds 8.00 is right, and I think him handicapped, he could definitely be within 5 games. I don't see it ending 6-4, 6-3. I see it ending like 7-5, 7-5, or 7-6, 7-5. Definitely, I think Young is underrated for this match, especially since his Davis Cup performance a few weeks ago versus the same opponent. Next matchup, we have Dominic Thiem versus Feliciano Lopez. Dominic Thiem is probably one of my favorite players, even though he has been doing poorly, and I think ultimately Lopez is going to win this match. I do find it's going to be an interesting game nonetheless. I'm not sure. This is probably the game. I don't know what to expect on. If you look at the head-to-head, Dominic Thiem won last time in straight sets in the US Open just a few months ago. But recently he hasn't fulfilled any expectations, losing to Benine in Irving, now playing Indian Wells, and then losing to Bautista Agut in Dubai, which I think he probably should have won, even though it's an uneven matchup, him being the lower seed rank than him. And then Lopez beating Nishikori, which surprised everyone, myself included, in straight sets. He is all about his spin serve, and he did exceptionally well, not giving Nishikori that much of an edge that Nishikori usually takes. So I find that matchup definitely interesting, and I think I have absolutely no prediction for this match. I think Thiem might be worth the money, but I don't know if he's gonna win. I think I want him to win, but I really don't know what's going to happen. Next is Jan Leonardo Struff versus Garcia Lopez. This is also, I hate to butcher the word interesting, but it's a strange matchup because when I looked at it, I thought, oh, Garcia Lopez, he's the higher seed. He's definitely going to win it. But then I looked last year in Vienna, a couple months ago, Struff won 2-0. And I looked, Garcia Lopez hasn't won anything since Rotterdam and only got to round 2 in Rotterdam. So I think Struff, as the young gun, definitely has the chance since both of them lost to Kokkinakis. But to be fair, Garcia Lopez at least took a set to Kokkinakis. And then Struff lost to Smichek in Irving round 1, which is bad since it's a challenger. I do see Struff at least taking a set. I probably scoreline for this one, Struff will probably win the opening set either 6-3 or 6-4, and then Garcia Lopez, if he could rally back, will probably win after that 6-4, 6-4, or 6-3, 6-4. So I think with that in mind, Struff will win a set, or probably over. I think over is probably the safest thing to guess about that matchup, because if Struff does win in straight sets, I think he'll at least force a tiebreak, considering that he is one of a good server and likes to hold service games, and probably might get broke when he serves out a set if he does break, considering he is young and inexperienced. Next matchup, we have Niemann versus Mayer, or Mayer. I'm not sure exactly which pronunciation it is, but I'll just go with Mayer. Niemann has won both of the previous encounters, surprisingly, even though Mayer is the higher seed rank. So I'm gonna go with Niemann, even though he is the underdog in this one. He has won both previous encounters, and Mayer hasn't played on hard courts since the US Open. Or not the US Open, I apologize, the Australian Open. So I think it's definitely something to take note of that Niemann has won both of the previous matchups, and Mayer hasn't played on hard court in a couple months. So I think Niemann probably has it in 3 sets, maybe. But I think overall he could probably take it in 2 sets. It's definitely going to be one to watch, especially since I don't know why he's considered an underdog, especially considering the head-to-head. Next matchup is Geraldo versus Haase. I haven't seen much of Geraldo this year, mostly because he usually plays on clay. So I think Haase probably has this one in straight sets, considering he made such a good run last week, beating Wawrinka and then losing to Rosol in 3 sets. I think that's probably, don't quote me on this, but I believe that's the furthest he's ever gotten into a Masters 1000. And I think he'll probably use that momentum, and I think he'll probably just win outright versus Geraldo, especially since Geraldo's coming into this cold, not playing a match at Miami yet, even though Haase has played 3 others, and then Geraldo just losing in straight sets versus Dagopolov last week. So I think Kase, for some reason, is an underdog, and I think he'll probably just end up taking it. Next matchup is Krejcik versus Tomic. Now, last week, I thought Tomic was going to beat Djokovic, but for some reason, Tomic forfeited, saying that he has a back injury. I don't know what that was all about. I don't know what it is with Australians and getting injured. If you saw last week, Nick Kyrgios got injured, and I don't know how that happened. But back to Tomic. I just don't know what he's going to do. He is an untrustworthy player, and I think Krejcik probably has the upper hand playing on the court before. So I think if I look at the handicaps, plus 3.5, yeah, I think Tomic's probably going to force the first set to a tiebreak, and then probably win the next set 7-5. I don't see Tomic overly dominated Krejcik, especially since Krejcik will probably have the home crowd being in the USA. Our next matchup is probably a funny one. Kevin Anderson versus Sam Querrey. Sam Querrey is probably one of the weirdest fellas I've ever seen out of American tennis. He played on the Challenger Tour, won a bunch of challengers in a row, came back, and then just flat out lost in almost every round one of every ATP 250. And I don't think that Anderson is gonna have any problem beating Querrey. I don't even think it's gonna be close. It's just Querrey has a lot of things going for him, but I just think Anderson definitely has the upper hand. And then our final match of the day is Berdych versus Chung. Berdych, I was surprised last week when I was watching the match that he got bageled via Federer. But overall, I don't think Berdych is going to have any type of problem. But I do think that he's probably going to play it safe, learn the court a little bit. So I don't think that -6 is appropriate. I think he'll probably win 6-4, 6-4, or 6-4, 6-3. So I think Chung will probably put up somewhat of a fight, especially since he bageled Granollers Pujols last round, which I found surprising. When I saw that, I was completely amazed and just didn't expect it. So those are my picks for tomorrow. And so that wraps up for round 2, day 1 of Miami. Make sure, if you like this, follow me on Twitch so you could get live podcast updates, and subscribe to me on youtube.com/markerplays. I also had a request to talk about some hockey, so I'll pull up that as soon as I'm done with this point and see what games are on tomorrow. I believe I was sad that, spoiler alert, that Senators lost today. Well, they're still playing, but it's 5-1. No, actually, they did lose 5-1. I was hoping that they would pull it off, but alas, they didn't. But on to the games for tomorrow. Tomorrow, we have Calgary Flames versus Minnesota Wild. 2 matchups, and I think this is going to be a close one. The Flames are rated really low, especially since they lost 3 of their last 5. But I still have hope in them. They are fighting for the playoffs, so are the Kings and the Jets. And I think it's going to be a close game, especially since it's a division game. Definitely will be close. So I think it'll come down to goalies. And I think since Calgary has a lot of injuries, it'll be probably both sides playing defensively. So I think it'll probably go under 5.5 goals, considering both teams need the win, especially since the Minnesota Wild are only 4 points behind, or 4 points ahead, 4 points ahead. They'll probably both be playing extremely defensively, especially with, I don't know who's going to be the goalie tomorrow, but if it's Ramo versus Debenik, it'll probably end up being like a 2-1 game, so I think under. And then the next game, we have Chicago Blackhawks versus the Columbus Blue Jackets. Blackhawks are one of those teams that you can never just faithfully rely on. But the Blue Jackets have hit a rough spot, losing a lot of games. So I think it's safe to say Blackhawks will probably win like 3-1, 4-1. Even though they are inconsistent at scoring, I see absolutely no reason why they should just flat out lose like they did to the Stars, because at least the Stars are still somewhat fighting for playoffs. I don't think they will make it, but, you know, it's just, the Blackhawks are one of those inconsistent teams. Though they will win tomorrow, probably by like a score of 4-1, 3-1. Definitely by at least 2 goals. And then the last game for tomorrow is the Edmonton Oilers, one of my favorite teams, versus the Dallas Stars. As I was saying right before, the Stars were able to beat the Chicago Blackhawks 4-0 and then go ahead and lose to the Columbus Blue Jackets 3-2 in overtime. Talk about consistency within each team. I'm sorry, they won 4-3 in regular time. Sorry. And then the Stars beat the Flames, so I don't think the Stars are going to have any trouble beating the Edmonton Oilers. But I think it'll be an interesting game to watch. But I think Stars in regular time, sadly, even though Edmonton's one of my favorite teams. And that'll have to do it here for tonight. Remember to subscribe to my YouTube channel and follow me on Twitch.